also wanted to just say, so you've got 3 books, which, have the general theme of myth. So you've got, which I really love, Norse Mythology for Kids, Tales of Gods, Creatures, and Quests, great subtitle. And then also, so this one that I want to talk about, so also true for beginners. And then also volcanoes in Old Norse mythology, myth, and environment in early Iceland. And as you know, Iceland, I love Iceland, spent a lot of time there. And so to get started, the volcano is erupting again. So
right.
why don't you tell me, from your space there on high, your very spiritual presence with your light in the background there, what would a Viking Age Nordic person have thought about the eruption of a volcano?
All right. Wow. Okay. Yeah. Going straight into it. Yeah, I do apologize for the halo behind me, but my office is under construction right now, and you can see some boxes and stuff as well. So
entirely appropriate.
Yes. So yeah, what would a Viking have thought about volcanoes? Well, my theory is that they would have approached that situation in the 800s and 900s exactly like what we see other peoples do around the world. And that is by ultimately inserting it in a meaningful context in their worldview. And if we presume that Old Norse mythology was the basis for their understanding of the world, then we may also assume that they would have used Old Norse mythology to make sense of the phenomenon. So what you have in 9th century Iceland is a bunch of Scandinavians and Gaels coming over, settling and building a society. And they do that on basis of these traditional knowledge systems that they brought with them from their respective places. Now, what we know is that the one that becomes most dominant is the knowledge system from Scandinavia. And so it looks like they would have, at least if you believe my research on that, that they would have perceived these phenomena as workings of various kinds of like spiritual entities. I like to call them that rather than gods and giants and all that stuff, because that's more like the cartoon version of it.
Yeah.
And we can see that there is a particular poem that has been preserved in this short story called Bergbuatháttur. And this is a situation where this guy, he's on a journey across the mountains, and he runs into a blizzard, and then he goes into a cave, and in that cave he sees these 2 giant eyes staring at him. And it turns out that is a bergbui, a mountain dweller. And then this bergbui starts reciting this poem that is describing volcanic eruptions. This is really the only medieval source that directly, sort of in a tangible way, addresses volcanic eruptions from Iceland. We have, of course, mentions in the annals of there was an eruption over here and an eruption over there and that kind of stuff, just like briefly mentioned. And this has led a lot of scholars to assume that the Icelanders were sort of like shrug about volcanoes. It's like we're talking about the most geologically active place on the planet. And all of these people living here, they were just like, nah, whatever. Some scholars have suggested that, it's only when Christianity comes around that they start getting quote unquote superstitious about it. And my answer to that is that no, that's definitely not the case. Christianity has a different idea about what volcanic activity is. This comes from Pope Gregory the Great, who writes about volcanic eruptions and geologic activity in context of Sicily, and ties it in with the fire and brimstone version of hell. And so this is adopted later on in medieval Iceland. But before that, it looks like what Icelanders did was that they looked at this stuff, and then they were like, well, this is obviously the workings of the Jötnar, with the ice involved in some contexts. The poem itself mentions battles between Thor and different Jötnar. Odin is also involved. So what my suggestion is then that what happens is that we get these sort of like cluster motifs, ideas that are very similar to what we see on pretty much the rest of the planet. When it comes to this, we have giant beings, we have birds typically. Sometimes we also have various forms of snakes or large water dwelling animals of various kinds, that are the ones that are sort of the geologic activity is attributed to them. And boom, where do you get that? You get that in Völuspá, the description of Ragnarok. And you also have, of course, the fire giant Surtur, who comes out of the ground with a flaming sword. And what I try to do in context of all of this is to locate perhaps the origin of these narratives and motifs in context of actual historical eruptions. And what we have right around 930 is this massive eruption called Eldgjá that had hemispheric impact. We know that it disrupted farming in China and southwestern Asia. And if that is the case, if it did that, this Icelandic eruption did that, then it must have had a lot of impact on Iceland as well. And what is the comparable example? Well, that's Lakagíga in 1783 to 4, where we see a massive volcanic eruption that has impact on the European continent in terms of gases that kill a lot of people. It impacts the way that the sky looks. We have plenty of interesting descriptions of it from England, for instance, in the late 1700s. And of course, what it also does is that it impacts life directly in Iceland. We see in some counties close to the eruption, I think it's around 20 to 25% of the population die. Primarily because of fluoride contamination of the feed for the animals, so the sheep die. And we have this wonderful description, or wonderful, I don't know if it's wonderful, but it's an interesting description of it, at least, in the Eldrit, these narratives that are being written from, I think the oldest one is from the beginning of the 1600s. These are descriptions of volcanic eruptions in Iceland in this period. And it looks like those Eldrit are primarily being created because this is a way to get the attention of the Danish king far, far away, and essentially send him a list of damages and say, can we have compensation, please? Because a lot of them come with these lists of, we lost so and so much, and he does send compensation for this stuff. And so we have this description of the Lakagíga and eruption, and it's actually quite similar to some of the stuff that we see in earlier literature, where the lava flows are compared to rivers. The boulders that are coming in the lava flows are compared to whales, swimming in the fire rivers and such. And so when we look at this globally, we see similar ways of talking about volcanic eruptions. So this looks like a very common human way of actually just trying to conceptualize what it means that the earth is all of a sudden on fire and exploding.